Go. Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is Strange Mosaic, and Niish is with me for her second appearance on this show. And for some of you, you've also been listening to hours of us rambling last week. This was scheduled before then, so we decided to do it anyway. And we are going to talk about a topic that I heard Niish mentioned in an episode she did with David Weiss. I listened as I was preparing for my show with David Weiss, and it was a topic that like really piqued my interest, but I felt glossed over. So she's here to talk about that. And then I think in the second hour, we'll do a little sort of wrap up or feedback on what we had talked about last week regarding Elisa Lam and whatnot. So Niish, welcome back. How are you?
Excellent, Emily. Thank you for having me back. We're both a little bit tethered to, I guess, lower energy. You just had a powwow and I just had a powwow. So let's hope we have something.
Yes. Well, hopefully today's topic, we're going to be talking about the idea of sentient membranes. And hopefully we have at least each of us 2 brain cells with sentient membrane is still intact that we can rub together and use as the friction for the energy to power this conversation.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? I have so much faith in us. We're pros at this.
Yeah, absolutely.
We
So
can just talk. I mean,
we can just talk.
we can just carry it on.
So sentient membranes, right? Like, it came up in the conversation with David Weiss, kind of in the area of like, what is it that is enclosing this system, right? Like when you guys were
Yes.
talking about like the firmament and like maybe the ocean above and whatnot. And, I think that's interesting, but where we're at right now, just like in time, in our reality, is this the battle space is the membrane, and that and how easily it can be penetrated or not penetrated. This goes for like frequencies into our cells. This goes for vaccinations into our bodies. This goes for UFOs coming in through the dome. This goes for time travel, for deep sea excursions, everything. It is all about finding ways into spaces that you haven't been before.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's so much here to springboard off of. It's We could look at it in so many different ways. And of course, the way in which I was referring to this was one aspect, and I was likening it to, uh, I guess, a cell, but also that membrane that one moves through in different states. So from death to life, basically. Or even, I mean, you could even consider it the hymen.
Mhm. Since we're in lower vibrations today. Yeah. I mean, in every, I'm not going to say every, but in a lot of these like areas of significance or importance or deep meaning in our realities, there exists this membrane that is not for super firm or hard like a brick wall, right? But that is not necessarily open to everything. There's like a, there has to be to a certain level permission to pass through. Not that people always ask permission, right? But these are like when we go to a store, right? Like generally anybody can walk through the door. But when we're talking about into our bodies, into our minds, into spaces we haven't explored yet, that no place people have gone before or very few, there generally seems to be more requirements than when you're just walking in the door to Target, right? Like there
Yes.
seems to be different kinds of conditions that need to be resolved before admittance is permitted, right? And,
Yes.
and when that permission is violated, right, we have like certain kinds of situations that are incredibly chaotic and problematic and traumatic and have long range consequences and whatnot that are created by that non-permission, right? And even when there's permission granted, sometimes that is the case, right? But this idea, and this also, one of the things that you and I have spoken about since almost the very first time we've talked was the whole deal like with the octopuses and their intelligent skin, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think these things are connected. And I guess I always used to think of it as like skin suit technology, but maybe that was just a step on the way to understanding the sentience of the membrane, right? Like it's, then that the way it actually works is different than the way I had thought about it when I was thinking of it as technology. I mean, it still is a kind of technology, but this idea of sentient membrane feels to me more timely for where we're at now than skin suit technology, which felt like an advanced way of understanding it 4 or 5 years ago or 3 years ago or whatever, right? But the sentient membrane seems more in tune with where we're at now and like how our reframes of reality have evolved based on the more we know, right?
Yeah. There are a couple things that I'm trying to remember his name. Was it Roger Leir that dealt with the implants?
Leir is one of the people that I think has talked about.
Well, he was the surgeon taking him out, and he's passed. I don't know if it is. I know Lear, but I don't know if it was Roger Lear.
Okay, I know what you're talking about, though. I think most people listening know what we're talking about.
Yeah, and so he was dealing with those mystery implants that people were having, and they seemed to not have there seemed to never be like an incision point
Mm-hmm.
that he could find to understand how they got there. And when he got them under the microscope, he discovered, well, they did, the team working around all this, that an organism that was bioorganic
Mm-hmm.
actually was growing from them. So he'd pull them out of the person. Sometimes they would have to uh they would run from it. And if I've got one, and if I rub on it too much, it literally darts away
Yep, yep,
from
yep.
my arm. And it freaks people out. I'm like, I don't even remember when it appeared there, but here, touch it and watch it go away, and
Right.
follow it. And so, when he was getting them in the surgery room and trying to get at some of them, he noticed this and was postulating that there might have been a magnetic effect, a piezoelectric effect, some sort of something that was causing that. But inevitably, when we would get them out, he was always talking about and showed all this. It's all there. The membrane that was around them,
Yep.
and some of them wouldn't allow he couldn't cut with scalpels and stuff. But what they found ultimately with some of them was that this organic membrane was growing from the metal itself. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that's a fantastical thing. Think
Mm-hmm.
about that. And if we think about that in terms of where we are now, because he's been dead a few years,
Yep.
all the stuff he was doing is now out of the land of Wu. And he was always trying to get it out of the land of Wu. He was, a medical, he's the real true. And so he was trying to bring this out of Wu and into scientific inquiry. And so you look back now, and all of that stuff he was talking about and dealing with has come into one way or another the mainstream via scientific releases and journals and all this. Well, look at where we are with biorobotics, bioorganic robotics. And whereas the tech may not be there to understand why these membranes were growing from those metals that were oftentimes extremely rare on the earth metals. And I cannot
Mm-hmm.
recall which ones at the time, but the information's out there. So it's not like the stuff's just lying around. It was, it's sourced from like one location. It's very rare in that location, and it would find its way in these people. And so this idea, I want to just hold this as something on the table, right? So on one level, when we think about a membrane, there's this idea of initiatic sequencing that goes on in the psycho-emotional nature of humans. And it could be something as simple as your baby has just gone from crawling to taking that first step. This is an initiation into a next level. It's not acknowledged as such, but it is, you've plateaued and you've created a new level, and now you've leveled up, and now you're a walking baby, you're a walking toddler wherever you are. And so when you start thinking about membranes on that level, aside from the bioorganics, then we start to open this narrative up further into, say, the hidden universities, right? The
Mhm.
secret universities that is the precursor to the mystery schools and all that.
The invisible colleges. Yeah.
Yes, the invisible colleges. And I was trying to stay clear of that because I didn't know if that was going to flag your system.
Nope.
Because that's one, like I had said that somewhere, and then I got that weird little note under my video saying Masonic, like,
Oh, I don't care about that. Like,
okay.
yeah, that's good. Yeah, yeah. So,
And anyway, I figure most people know what I'm talking about. But so when we start thinking about all these layers of initiatic experiences through life and how they work down our from, like, say, the etheric level all the way into matter, and on that journey down, which I think is kind of a descent down into matter, is we encounter the organic, the bioorganic, the flesh, and if we look at this idea that Leir was bringing forth, that this stuff was growing forth from a metal, and it seemed to have a life of its own, that's not a far fetch to push yourself into the idea of, well, is there sentience there? It seems to be aware, and it puts out a self-defense something or other that won't let a scalpel get through it. So it, much like the octopi, right, where it's got
mhm.
this ability to navigate a terrain in a very intelligent like manner. So then this starts to open up the idea of sentient membranes.
Okay, so I did not expect implants and Roger Leir to come up, but this is exactly why I love you. And I feel like I've just transitioned from one round of the glass bead game with Michael into another one here with you. So, all right. So when you started talking, I went ahead and pulled up some stuff on Roger Leir, and it is Roger Leir, Leir.
Yes,
And I was just looking up images. I just typed his name and I looked up images, right?
there he is.
And so
Yes.
the first thing, like I'm not going to click on them to go verifying because I'm just doing like free association here and
Yeah.
sort of what comes through, right? So the first thing I notice is this one here on the left that I'm circling with the red circle here. Like,
Yes.
look at that. Whatever is inside of that looks like some kind of gel or viscous liquid. Right. So
Sure
that's kind of
does.
interesting. Like we hear a lot about hydrogel and stuff with current penetrative
Absolutely. Yep.
technologies, right? So okay, so then I'm moving along, and I'm seeing something like this, like sorry, this one here that I'm circling right now,
Yep.
and this one here, and of course
And that one.
we've all pulled these out of our bodies.
Yep.
Things like that look like this, right? Or at least most people who would be listening to this after already having listened to us for 3 hours recently. Right. And so right. So there's also like this kind of thing I'm looking at here. I've seen these
Go
before.
up, scroll up one section and over where you see that one that looks like a chip, a
Yep.
digital chip,
Here.
over to the, yes.
Yeah.
You know?
So those, yeah, we know these are the ones I think people think about when they think implants. But for people like you and I, we know that it's really a lot more like this.
Absolutely.
What we're dealing with, right? And there's several examples, but I keyed in really quickly on this one, right?
Yes.
Because this shows, so let's click on this and make it bigger.
It shows that membrane.
It shows the membrane. Now, I have pulled a ton of stuff like this out of my body, right? But what I'm also going to say about this that is kind of interesting is that whatever this is looks like what Michael talks about, this type of coal called anthracite that is available most of the anthracite in the world. It's a special kind of coal because it doesn't make fumes when it's burnt, right? And it's mostly available in Scranton, where it also happens that just a few miles away is where the largest deposit of Herkimer diamonds are.
Oh,
right? So so we have, presumed that the process of coal into diamonds leaves both things as excrement, right? And so like this stuff here is in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where if you watch Man in the High Castle, there's also where the diamond
yes.
belt is, which is where people cross over between worlds. So now we're into, is anthracite some kind of technology that can track people who are travelers? Right. And then we have this biological thing that is what you are talking about, right? And this is does the metal, when it is inserted in our biology, does this immediately begin to develop around it? I've pulled things out that look like this before, and we're also starting to see more and more with these nano wires that are inside of people, something like this that sort of surrounds them. It doesn't look exactly like this. It doesn't have as natural of a look as this has. It literally looks more like plastic on a wire. But all of the things they're doing with these these technologies that are going to become more widely dispersed are cheaper and more technological versions of this other thing that is beyond their complete understanding, right? So they're creating sort of mock-ups and mimics according to the same principles and things like that, right?
Yes.
That sort of go in. But this right here is quite interesting. And if, what you're talking about how when you sort of try and go after it, it moves, right? So like you can touch the spot, and then it'll move. But if, let's say you have an open sore and you're trying to bring it forward, when you literally go in to grab it, it'll get sucked right back inside. Like,
yes.
I've talked about that. And I don't know if you ever heard that episode that Randy did with Whitley Strieber, where he talked about having a surgeon try to remove one from his ear. And quite literally, every time the surgeon went to grab it with the scalpel, it would move. And so the guy finally was like, I can't, your ear's too, I can't really, the ear's a complicated place to deal with this. So the only way I would be able to get it was to cut your ear off. Right. And so they decided not to do it. And instead, he just decided to make the implant his and figure out how to become in control of it. Right.
Yeah.
So it's super interesting to look at this stuff. But if you look at these right here, like look at these black pieces of metal and look at what's developed around them, and then come over here and look at this picture here, UFO Chronicles, and we're looking at what we would think of as being alien eyes, but it actually really looks like the metal inside the membrane.
Yes.
So then, right. So that's kind of an interesting, sometimes I think when we're having visions of beings, or like illusions, or in some cases hallucinations or delusions of entities, what we're really looking at is like what's happening in our body or in our brain, right? So when you have a vision of an alien, like I'm wondering if we're seeing this stuff, we're getting a remote view of what's inside of our body, right?
Well, see, this is why it becomes even more significant in this meander that we're on.
Oh my God, I love that you said meander, because we were talking about meandering in my show with Mike. I love the tendrils of connection, and I'm going to get into tendrils in just a second. But this is wonderful. Okay, continue.
Well, think about the birthing experience in the cow, the placenta, right? And just overlay that on top of everything you just said, and there is that just opens up this narrative even further.
And the weird things that certain groups do with placentas of their own children, and the things that happen with it in our culture, right? That's kind of interesting as well. But the next thing I was going to say, so Laura's over here. She's really helpful. She researches the things that we talk about as we talk about them. And when she finds something significant, she points it out to me. So here she has an article from Alien.
Hi, Laura, by the way.
She just stepped out of the room for 1 second. But
okay.
But this is from a website called Alien Jigsaw. And it is basically, there's a quote here. Alien, talking about Roger Leir, and the quote says, "The tissues surrounding these small metallic foreign objects, which looked like cantaloupe seeds radiating small tendrils, were invariably devoid of any inflammatory reaction and were found inexplicably to contain nerve proprioceptors. No way do these things exhibit the characteristics normally seen with foreign bodies, which find their way through accident or other means into the human organism. Well, that takes us right into season 2 of OA, right?
Yes.
When these kids come into the house and then suddenly they have a seed in their brain, which are growing tendrils out of their ear that seem to have nerve proprioceptors, right? The way that those tendril kind of thing, right? It's the same sort of idea. So going to that house is kind of akin in this situation to having an alien abduction and implantation experience.
And this harkens back to all these different layers of experience, of sentient experiential phenomena that we're investigating.
And the interesting thing is, this is from his book, The Aliens and the Scalpel, right? Literally, the aliens are in the eyes. So, so think about what I was just saying about we're seeing these implants in our body. Literally, it's a picture of an iris with central heterochromia that has the reflection of 2 aliens in it, and also space, space.
Holy shit!
Right?
Oh my God! Yes, yes. This is why we do this.
I did not expect to talk about aliens or Roger Leir or implants, but this is fascinating.
Well, think about this. So if we get back to the cowl around the baby, the placenta, and how that is in and of itself has created its own bioorganic environment in which the fetus develops and all this, and also is part of how it also helps push the baby through the birth canal. It's part of that, slippery. And so it's got this, when we're talking sentience, we're talking constantly evolving, if you will. There's dual purpose. So it's shifting to its needs. It's shifting to what needs to happen to further its objective, whatever that is. And then if we springboard into polyvinyl pyrrolidone, and that's self-assembling. It's basically this tech that self-assembles, and it's related to, I'm sure you're aware of it, and
of course,
and so I wonder if these things, when we see the tendrils coming off of them, if you get more than one of these in you, say you get several or lots, and we think about Morgellons and all this, or Morgellons, how you want to say it, but what are the possibilities of having several of these things within you in a smaller area, say your brain,
right?
With that idea of the way self-assemblage goes on with the polyvinyl pyrrolidone. So there's something there that's kind of creepy.
Okay, so listen to this. Yes, from further down in this article that Laura pulled up on Alien Jigsaw, I just am not showing it here, guys, because it's not on my computer and it's too clunky for me to go get it right now. We'll link to it in the show description. So it talks about the different ways that these implants were lab tested, right? And it talks about density immersion technique in toluene, mechanical property analysis, including hardness and elastic modulus, X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy, scanning electron microscopy, X-ray diffraction pattern analysis, electromagnetic properties analysis. All of these were double blind. And so then after that, in the article, there's that quote that I already read up there about the cantaloupe seeds and the tendrils, right? And it had ended by saying that these in no way exhibit the characteristics normally seen with foreign bodies, which find their way through accident or other means into the human organism. And then it goes on to say, in quote unquote normal cases, a foreign body would generate substantial and persistent inflammatory tissue response, and nerve tissue would never develop around it. It seems weird that these things were somehow designed to be biocompatible with the abductee. That's his paradigm, that it's always an abductee. I don't know that is necessarily my paradigm, or that it's not. I don't know. and wired into the nervous system. So that goes to what you were just talking about, right? The body
Yes.
accepts it and it joins right in, right? It creates
Yes.
its own connections and it connects with the other things that were there before, right? Other interesting characteristics include all objects were recovered from the left side of the body. All exotic specimens, 7 of the 8, emitted a powerful electromagnetic field easily detectable with a Gauss meter. When removed from the human body, all 7 exotic specimens bizarrely and inexplicably fluoresced under UV black light. During laboratory analysis, the objects were found to be complex and contained a diversity of elements. And there's about 10 elements listed there: aluminum, barium, calcium. Laura's helping me because she's a doctor. Iron, magnesium, sodium, nitrogen, zinc, and a few others I'm not sure of, right? Not normally found together in natural objects, right?
Yeah. And a couple of them are very, very rare. I can't think of iridium or something like that. I can't recall.
And then xerophthalmia, which is the technical name for night blindness, was common to 50% of the male patients and 90% of the female. In the general population, the percentage is in single digits. Of course, this might be just a bizarre coincidence, right? So that's how many these people had night blindness.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right? So that is kind of interesting. I mean, there's more stuff that goes on, but I thought those, okay. So, and he wrote a book that was for Whitley Strieber's Hidden Agendas too. So there is a connection between the two there, but that is, interesting that it's the same elements that we normally have, but in different combinations that creates that, right? And so I was going somewhere with this, but this growing of tendrils, right? Like we think it's, we think of it because of the presentation as like a all technological thing, right? But this seems to be like a semi-natural process, sort of, that he's describing, like those, with that on there. And one of the things that came up when I was looking at the OA stuff, we did OA at Conspiracy Cocktail the other day, is one of the things that we don't understand about ourselves is that we're like partially plants.
Yes.
And this idea of tendrils growing and then all of this like night blindness, like the plants to have a really different night life than they do day life.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And we got into this, I think yesterday in my Project Kids. I mean, everything is all over the place. I can't remember where I'm hearing what anyway, but I mean, these quote unquote abductions tend to happen at night.
Yes, they do.
Plants tend to go through certain processes at night. And I just, and if you think about it.
Well, and things like mycoplasma, that's when that process, that happens, where they come out and start processing the dead tissue in that cycle.
Interesting. I guess this gives weight to your theory that we're all dead and at night the process is managed, right? So we don't recognize that we're dead. But it's kind of interesting. Like, I think, I'm not sure that I know exactly where I want to sort of go with this, but it is true. Those things do look like cantaloupe seeds, right? And this interconnectedness, right, between the sentient membranes, whether those be cells in your body or people, right? We all have skin, we all have our own sentient membranes, and we are connected whether we can see those connections or not, right? And it's kind of like a giant organism, like the mycelial network under the ground.
Yes. Well, if we look at, and so if we kind of pull up and look at, I'd never seen the series V. And so I got through season 1 and I saw like a trailer. I'm not sure how it came into my world, but I was like, oh my God, I've got to see this. I remember the 80s one or, whatever, the first one and I remember it seeming kind of cheesy, but then I didn't realize they'd remade it. And I saw the trailer and I'm like, first of all, I love that actress that plays the main, and so I'm like, okay, I'm in just because of her. She chooses good roles, she's good, this has got to be good. And then the whole idea of they're hiding amongst us, right? Well, it blew me away that the skin, the human skin, the flesh that they were rocking actually was grown over their original form, that they had hybrid themselves enough
Mhm.
or altered themselves enough that all was bioorganic to what was under. And I could not, I mean, that was one of those, how, why was I never exposed to this? Because I've come to this on my own, but this was there and it's in that series. And whereas the other one I think was harder to grasp, because I think that was just sort of masking or something. This was very significant. And then when you think of it with the idea that this membrane self generates from these particular elements that make up those implants to create a fleshy barrier around itself, we are talking new level of what the hell is going on. This really starts to bring in the idea of what's walking with us, and also possibly what are we?
What the fuck are we? Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to apologize to the listeners at this point, because this may be the part where this moves from being a reasonably interesting show with flow to a like what the fuck is going on, like live trying to figure things out session. So Laura pulled up the periodic table of elements. Okay.
Yes.
And when I'm looking at it, my body started to vibrate, and it made me remember that Walter Russell, who I've been talking about a lot lately. You're familiar with Walter Russell?
You know how I am. I'm not sure until I get context.
Universal One, right? He had this vision of this machine that is like essentially a free energy kind of machine. That also, that's how the earth works. And that's what that FPV angel stuff I told you about last week, like
Oh,
talking about.
yes. Yeah.
He had his own version of the periodic table that he came up with, right? And so the first thing I did, I'm going to screen share with you. Hold on a second. The first thing I did when I saw this on Laura's um, screen was like, oh, I'm going to go check Walter's, right? And so this is the first thing that came up. I'm going to show you a couple of things. This is the first thing that came up, right? And this is Walter Russell's. Can you see it?
Yes. Oh my.
His periodic chart of the element.
Mm-hmm. Look
And
how serpent-like that is.
serpent-like, think about the mounds,
Mm-hmm.
the like plasma discharge scars on the earth with like a la Andrew Hall Electric Universe,
Oh yeah, sperm.
right?
You
It
know, like there's
also
a
has to
whole
do
bunch.
tones and octaves. And Michael and I had just gotten into talking about acoustic field and how important that is to time travel and mind control, right? And that really goes into everything that when we're talking about implants and aliens, we're talking about time travel and mind control,
Yes.
right? And acoustics. And so there's acoustics that relate to the way the flow. So this is the unwinding of his uh, periodic element chart. He has all of these things that if you look at this looks like musical notes, sacred geometry, serpent mounds, whatever. And he's associating certain chemicals with certain octaves.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The diagram showing the 10 octaves of integrating light, one octave within the other. These 10 octaves constitute one complete cycle of the transfer of the universal constant of energy into and through all of its dimensions and sequence.
That's quite genius.
Okay. And so, like, I mean, Michael and I have been talking a lot about like, we don't actually know what the fuck is going on here. Like, this could be some, like, we think of this as like we're going through social change and cultural change and political change and technological change. But like, we don't ever think of it as like a chemical process going on both in the earth and in our bodies that is
Right.
trying to be managed by controlling our minds and the sounds we hear.
Yes.
Right? And this to me is that's what I think I'm picking up from this. But then I went over and I just decided to look at some images of his stuff, right? So this is what his periodic table looks like when it's all wound up, and then it's unwound, and then we have this stuff. And look at this, like these look like building blocks, like the way we talk about like amino acids or, fatty chain, whatever the stuff, what's going on with our body. There's colors associated with it. This looks like music and light, waveform charting. This looks like DNA or train tracks. And we think about the way the train tracks are run over ley lines through the earth. So this is his periodic table of elements, and it all seems to, can look at this, the connection between geometry and harmonics.
Oh yeah, I'm seeing Mandelbrot all the way with all this too.
Right?
And there's the Taurus. Yeah.
And we see these functions happening in our body, and we see evidence that they're happening on the earth, a la the plasma discharge and the serpent mounds and things like that. Look at, and this looks like stuff you see in like Native American art. And look at this right here.
That's where my eye was, right there.
Right there. So this looks like this connection that we're talking about being built in the body, like neural nets or
yes.
webbing, right?
Yes,
webbing.
that's exactly the image I had, Emily, when I was talking about, the polyvinyl pyrrolidone.
But then look at this. Look at this right over here. This is one of his graphs. It's the order of hardness and compactness, but it also looks like a jukebox.
Right. It's a jukebox. It's the arc, so again, we've got the resonance, the tuning.
Right. And this is his graph of how like this is like the Earth's machine.
Mm-hmm.
There's a process of compression and the process of expansion, and they correlate to charge and discharge.
Yes. Well, and it's the Lorraine cross almost. And well, what is this? This is the Coptic cross, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
also looks like the Templar's cross.
Yes. And double helix. Well, yes. I'm just saying yes.
Like, look at even like some of this chart here, right? So if you have this flat disc through the middle, that's the flat Earth. And then you have this roundness created by the energetics or the harmonics and the sentient membrane that's created by that, right? But it's kind of all in a box, right? It has like this geometry, this cube around it that's broken up into these quadrants. And like, I mean, it's very... I mean, the Earth is all shapes, kids, not just one or something, right? But I mean, look at some of these. This was his charts that he created in the 20s to explain what we were living in. And then here you have like a representation of the energetic funneling with the Vesica Pisces and the compass and square.
Yes, it's this descent of spirit into matter. It's a very significant, and that moves into the whole language of religions as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. And just look at some of these graphs with the color and the chemical elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the notes on the kiwi, like in the last show I just did with Michael, we were getting into, I mean, it's amazing how this is just blended right together, even though you weren't present for the other conversation. But oh, yes. Laura says, oh, but you were.
Apparently there is a membrane between us all that's connecting us.
So,
yes, a fractal, absolutely.
So, I mean, this is just really fascinating. And this stuff that is like, whatever these implants are, maybe the thing that like brings us into resonance with something, right? Has those elements so that when a certain timbre or sound or acoustic thing happens, that like suddenly our consciousness comes into resonance with that which is creating it, like in a certain way that allows chemical processes. I'm just making shit up now, but like, sounds good. I don't know. Like, but I feel strongly that there's a connection between these things.
I feel, pardon me, there is such a connection there. Absolutely. And I still can't get away from how when we get to this point of compression, of pressurized, the piezo thing, the idea of transmutation, the ideas of transcendental, this, and so when we start moving into the mental stuff, how all this just continues to create these layers that create everything that we are here coming from, emanating a 0 point. And so in reference to the stuff Dr. Leir was pulling out, the 0 point is these weird amalgamations of specific metals that seem to have generated by their combination and by the pressure involved, and perhaps on some symbiotic interaction with our bioorganics, started to create beyond that and creating a a film. And I'm wondering, through this process of the connectedness and the grid that can happen, in the idea that I originally saw with the octopi,
Mm-hmm.
and how it was most significant to the eyes. And in my visions of seeing that, when I was noticing it, it seemed to be, uh, I saw them on the face, but I only saw them. What I have decided is the entry points are the eyes. I don't know the medical terminology around this, but on the inner corner of the eye, when I really started to dissect
Like where the
that,
tear duct is?
yes,
Okay.
started to dissect that imagery. Uh, and then, when I started to notice the Black Eye Club, right?
Yep.
That, and I've been holding true to this, that I believe that's the entry point of whatever this is, whatever that is, and that it goes in and it creates this process, this self assemblage that takes over the host, but in a way that fools the bioorganism it's taking over, like a Trojan horse.
Okay.
And so this is where we start to get this invasion of the body snatchers scenario, but not where the body decomposes, not where you have pod people, but it self generates inside, like a chrysalis happens. You know, like the whole thing with the butterflies and moths. It's an interior process. And by wiring itself into the neurotransmitters and the neuro memory, along with genetic memory, and activating certain genetic nodules within the DNA, and which activate genetic memory through your personal genealogy, that can go back who knows how long, and pulls forth what it was looking for. So some recessive gene lying there dormant,
Mhm.
that it needs to access to get this unfolding process going. You
Okay.
following me?
Yeah. Okay. So what occurred to me right before you started talking, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to leave that aside so I can listen to it. But actually, what you said just connects it. Like, we have a process going on inside of our bodies that mirrors a process that is going inside of the earth, right? So
Yes.
my guess would be that these metal implants have the same elements that the things that we call particle accelerators
Mm-hmm.
the earth have,
Mm-hmm.
right? And these we have an energy generating system in our body that's similar to the earth, so we're like little versions of the earth, right? And what you're talking about with this infiltration, it's a technological, or like, I don't know what it's a mimic. It's
Yes.
mimicking a natural process because it's on a fishing expedition. It's looking for something that information that can be opened up to each of us through a natural process that occurs over in our bodies and our minds during our lifetime, right? But somebody else wants in because they want to retrieve the information before we do, or control the way we receive the information. It's kind of like when the excavators go around the planet digging for pieces of the Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Right. And so when they find the piece, and they want to put that together with other pieces that they found other places that have been spread out all over Earth, right? And the same thing, like with people, right? Like our genetics, and this is why there's concentration on, who is mates with who and stuff like that, right? And they maybe have lost control of that. So at this point, just like they're looking all over the world to find the lost pieces of their Ark of the Covenant, they're trying to put back, we were having this conversation before we started about the connection between genetics and music. And Laura was telling me how there's these machines where you can take a clip of someone's hair or skin or fingernails and put it through this machine that will make a song. And each person has a unique song. So they're trying to put the symphony back together.
Yes, absolutely.
And
This is a big deal. This is like Terra preta.
Okay. What's Terra preta?
This is the work that Jared Murphy's been doing, and
Okay.
it's engineered, structured soil. So,
Octopi. Yep.
right. And so we're talking about it in terms of these suits that we're in, that are housing us. We're not, the suit we're in is the pod.
Yeah. So this process, and this would be the purpose of the infiltration of people's bodies, is because trying to unlock the phrase of music, right, that they're looking for. And they maybe will even be able to identify it when a certain tune is played, right? The sort of like harmonic, like kind of, they're looking for something. They're looking for a particular thing. And so they've been doing this black-eyed club thing, and that's not moving fast enough. So now they're shoving swabs up people's noses.
Yes.
Looking for the genetic fragment that plays the bar of music that is missing from the symphony that they're trying to assemble.
Yes, absolutely. I'm pulling right up to that.
Okay.
And see, so if you pull in the idea of Terra preta and the work that Jared Murphy's done with
How
that
do you spell that so I can pull this up?
TerraPreda, I believe that's how it's spelled.
Terra preta.
Yeah.
Okay, Terra preta is with a T, not a D. So Terra preta is a type of, okay, I got it. Terra preta is a type of is literally black soil. It's a type of very dark, fertile, artificial soil found in the Amazon basin. It is also, is that true that it's artificial?
It's found. So this is where Jared's
I'm just on
work.
Wikipedia, so I'm sure they're lying to us, but that's why I'm checking with you.
Jared wrote this book. It's not aliens, worse, it's us. And here's the discovery that they've been making all over the earth. It's in all of these sites. It's at Gobekli Tepe. It's everywhere. It's engineered soil. It's not organic soil. It's engineered. It's intelligently engineered.
So this goes to that stuff with the particle accelerators, right? Like, so what I was telling you earlier about the anthracite in the Herkimer diamond, and that is like an effect of the particle accelerator that is there in Scranton. What it's literally saying here is Terra preta, like it's basically charcoal.
It's charcoal, but it's also got the piezoelectric. It's got the crystalline form of silica in it.
Yep.
It's got all that stuff. So you've got to think of it on that level, that if you're looking at harmonics, if you're looking at all of the ways in which piezoelectricity works, and when we start talking about the harmonics, it is in conjunction. Why this is so important in the work that Jared's doing is, so you go and you look at the monoliths, and you look at Easter Island, all this, and you have to realize that it started from the soil up. Right. And there's an electrical resonance with all of those monoliths, with the perfectly cut bricks, if you will, at the pyramids, all the pyramids, that there's a resonance that was intelligently done, and it's a very big deal. It's almost like mycelium throughout the whole planet, really. It's a big brain.
Okay, so take this back to these particle accelerators. Like if I understand their work correctly, they're saying that these particle accelerators basically create the quote unquote nature around them. Right? So like this stuff literally could, so like if the particle accelerator seems to be some kind of machine, right? And this stuff is the residue of that. So the machine is engineering this soil, right? The machine is literally like, this is the
Yes.
residue of the functioning of that machine. And so then those structures that are made of this are in harmony with that machine. And that's why they've been able to last longer than the crap we build today, because the materials from which they are made are in resonance with that which made them.
Right. See, it's old tech. It's
Old
older
tech.
than we know.
Yeah.
And we don't understand it fully, and so we're not using it properly. In the we've lost the way. Like Jared calls it messing with a primitive civilization encounters some hardcore modern tech, and they pound on the board. Say it's a jet that had crashed in the past, and that you're talking
Right.
about a very primitive civilization. Calls it the blinky board, where they push on stuff and lights happen, and they're just awed by the blinky board, and something magical happens, and then they do something else and other lights happen on the blinky board. They know it's something special, they know it's tech, but they don't know how it works, what it really works. And so it gets thrown into being a mystical thing and not a natural tech thing,
Okay.
something that was
Yeah.
intelligently designed.
Right. So tech becomes that which lights up. That's that with which creates some sort of like uh energy that stands out brightly from the other stuff, right? Kind of thing, like the blinky board, the light up. Like they know that this is something different based on the fact that when they push something, it lights up.
Right.
Or when they pay attention to something, it lights up. I'm excited for you to hear what Michael and I were talking about earlier, because this just blends so beautifully with that. So then I'm wondering, right, if these people who they are looking for, trying to invade their genetics to release that phrase of the song or whatever, right, kind of thing, were
Yes.
either the people that created said tech, or like the first people to, like, because we don't know what came first, right, the machine or the people type of thing,
Right.
right?
Right. Especially at this point.
That like the people who were able to build civilizations around the tech that were in harmony with it, that could survive the machine adjusting itself through resets, right? Like, because it seems like the machine wants to like reset and start over every certain period of time, right? And if you're in harmony with that adjustment, like, so let's just say that, like, right now we hear, remember, I mean, you don't hear so many stories of it right now as you did a few years ago, but the trumpet sound, right, that sounds like it's simultaneously coming from under the ground and from the sky, right?
Which has started, those are happening again, by the way.
So that would, to me, that would be like the sign that like the machine in the earth is like being activated again, right? And it's creating the reflection of that in terms of what we see in the sky and the noises we hear coming from that, right? And like those that are in harmony with this machine are able to adjust to these changes. But those who are very bothered by it, scared of it, out of sync with it, or whatever, there seems to be a struggle, right? So what is it about the people that are able to be in harmony with it that are different? And perhaps that is what's being, now, because either they were the creators, the progenitors of it, or the people who had the original understanding of what it was.
Yes.
And that as culture and society and things like that have gotten like farther and farther away from that, even the people who pretend they're in control aren't quite sure what they're doing. They're aware of the machine and they're not telling us, right? But they still don't know how. They're crowdsourcing the answer to the problem that they have.
Yes, absolutely. I'm pulling right up to all this.
Okay. Continue. If I think I interrupted.
Well, it started to occur to me that when I was just meditating into all of this and thinking about it, I started to just imagine, just from my neuroscience classes, the a brain, a big brain, and the synaptic stuff that goes on, these lights in the sky, essentially, these lights in the blackness of matter.
Mhm.
And then, okay, so here, follow me here. There is, so in the woo woo world, and this is the woo woo world, and I don't recall who where this came from. I think it came from like the administration, like, or that disclosure they're putting forward that the aliens said, and just recently, like in this last season, the aliens that are out there that are contacting us told, I think this was during the last days of Trump, said that they're ready to, there needs to be a disclosure, but they don't think that humans or whatever are ready to understand what they are and the nature of space. So think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Think about
Totally.
that.
Yeah.
And so when you think about the blackness of the in the skull, and how it's the idea of the brain and neuraptic or synaptic responses through bridge work, through connecting of electricity, creates these reactions. And so think about the stars in the black of the sky in terms of a big brain, and then the whole cow thing with the firmament, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it starts to look a lot different to me, the idea of actual space. And then of course this is the idea of thinking it's outside of us, right?
Right.
Because we're always projecting outward, but we know, and anyone that's taken a basic neuroscience class knows this is all happening inside. And so uh in the blackness of your brain, your optic nerves back there, and like your senses are all happening right there, and it's all dark in there. And so this is all sensory information coming in. And I just started to hone in on the idea of Terra preta, membrane cells, these entities that are accessing through tear ducts, and starting to think about mycoplasma and the decay cycle when something is alive but dead, because life is death and death is life. This is that never ending cycle
Yeah.
in this realm, a very important word, uh, because in this realm, death is expected. So then you pull up into all of the more spiritual tomes, including the canon. But it's in Going Forth by Day, it's in the Sumerian stuff, it's in the Mayan stuff, it's all over that. And we touched on this last time, that this is the place where you die. This is the place where decay happens. And the other place, when we move through that cowl, which birth and death look like the same process, if you look at them really objectively, uh, and you square a timeline, I mean, you circle a timeline, again, helix kind of, or Ouroboros, you're looking at the idea of something way bigger. And somehow, in the way we're processing it, in the way we have mystified it, all of this, because we're playing with the blinky board.
Okay. So what you remember the other day when we were talking, because we were all over the place, I told you about this book that Laura had called Brain Stars.
Yes,
Okay,
with
so
the Glia or something, right?
he found it for me, and when I saw this, I was like, okay, so I've said forever that the secret space programming is the brain mapping program, which is another way of saying just exactly what you just said a minute ago, right? That like basically when we're quote unquote exploring space, we're really exploring the inner recesses of the mind, the dark void of our mind, right? The brain.
Yes.
Okay, the brain is the brain and the mind are not exactly the same thing, but they're related. And like the neurological process is like
That's spirit and matter. And that goes back to what's his name's research that we were just looking at.
yes. Okay, so look at Walter Russell. Okay, so I'm
Yes.
gonna just bring on the camera for a second so I can show
I
you.
mean, there were images. I saw one that said spirit and matter on the images we were looking at.
Yes, it said, yep, my spirit and matter. It said mind to matter. So this is Laura's book, Brain Stars.
Yes.
And if you look at it, so if you look at it, it looks
Yes.
like you're
Space.
space. right? Those are the glia. It looks like the activity in your brain, which it is, and it also looks like looking up at the stars at night or going to the
Yes.
planetarium. And
Yep.
then look at, if you can get closely and look, there's like geometry between them that look like a dodecahedron or a
Yes.
buckyball, right? But it
Yes.
also looks like when you watch commercials of how T-Mobile is connecting everything across the city,
Yes.
set up the exact same way. But now let me show you what I love about this book is because when I do my remote viewing and whatever, I'm looking at the inside of my own mind. That's what I remote view, right? And so I see things that like look like things we know from the outer world, but I also understand that these are things that are going on inside my body and my mind and my consciousness. So in this book, this is a picture of the spinal cord from the top down. Look what we see. Look at this. We see what looks remarkably like a monarch butterfly.
Yes. I've always been fascinated by that.
Right, we see that, and then we see all of these depictions. I'm going to find the ones. Okay, so this is some more depictions of some of the glia, and I don't know if you can see it very well on here, right? But it's basically looks a lot like the things I've talked about with the 4 lobe shape and a 5th element in the middle.
Yes.
Okay, but there's also, let me see if I can find the one in here. I haven't looked at this in a while, but there's literally some depictions of it where you can see that these things look like the Templar's cross. The Templar's cross is the inverse of the 4 lobe shape with the 5th element in the middle. I'm looking for one particular drawing in here. I don't know if I can find it right now. Let's see. Like, yeah, I used to just like scroll through it. Here we go. Look at this.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? So
Yeah.
this is like, like not really kidding when we talk about the secret to the secret space program is that there's no space. It's a program. It's in your mind, right?
Yes, it makes total sense.
That doesn't mean that there is no external process, but it is exactly mirroring like when you are watching the stars at night, and especially when you're in Joshua Tree, having communication with something that you're unsure about, whether is that you're like going, is that, I'm sure this happens where you are too, because you're out in a spot that if it's a super clear night and you're sober, or if it's not as clear, but you're on mushrooms, so you have x-ray vision, you can, see through to these things and they communicate with you. And you're asking yourself the question, are these stars? Are these planets? Are these UFOs? Are these angels? Is it me? Who am I communicating with myself? Because there's a relationship between them. You say something and they respond. So to me, that's evidence that they're the outer projection of the inner processes of our own mind.
And this is one of the key things that Carl Jung, and not the cult of Carl Jung, certainly many of those people, but Carl Jung himself discovered in his own workings on himself and through his social circle. It's all internal. But that does not negate everything that we're externalizing and experiencing, which again gets back to what's alive and what's dead. What are these terms for this? Because the processes that move through and recycle the things that are decaying, these things are alive. This is a function. This happens in wounds. This happens internally. This happens certainly when the body's left. But when you think about this, in the fact that these biosuits, so think about some of the crazy stuff that sounded very woo in ufology, where early on, it's not sounding woo at all now, but early on when they were talking about sentient vessels that respond just to one person, and we've seen it in all kinds of, like, The Expanse, I think, and stuff like that now in sci-fi, where it's a bioorganic vessel, hello, your body, and it responds to, in terms of playing it out for people in the outer world, in terms of making it easy to process, it responds to one person's body getting in it, and it's like a metal ship and everything. But if we transcend into the idea that whatever the spirit soul is, whatever our 0 point consciousness is, we're driving bioorganic suits, and then all the rest of the stuff we're talking about starts to fall into place.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm not as familiar with Carl Jung as you are, but Carl Jung has come up for me over and over in one particular line of research that I am super interested in, and that is synchronicity. And literally, the Carl Jung brought synchronicity forward in a way that was later picked up by Tavistock and used in
Yeah.
creating their mind control programs. And think about this, right? So Jung, like you, when I was talking about this process, you brought up Jung, and he talks about synchronicity, and there is no greater synchronicity than when an inner process and your inner world is mirrored in the outer world. That's what we say. Is I was just thinking about it, and then it happened in front of me. And we think that's some
Absolutely.
sort of magic, but it really just is the way our brain, our minds work. And so,
Well, think about this, Emily. So when we're talking about the double,
right.
and so in one of the ways, and this is part of the OA thing that triggered me, one of the ways in which you can navigate where you are is by reflection in a mirror,
Mhm.
under the rules of this plane, of this realm. I have a shadow. I can look in the mirror and see a reflection. This tells me, this gives me that feedback within the blackness of my brain that I am having this experience here. It's
Yeah.
very specific, it's autonomic. I don't even have to think about it because I've been programmed to I've made an agreement that that's how this plays out. Well, Carl Jung also, he brought out that our internal processes that could happen naturally. So his whole, he's postulizing, or
Postulating.
yes, his postulate is that everything, you pull it out, you name it, you separate it all, and you name it. Okay, so this is alchemy, and he was very influenced by the alchemists. So your psyche, for example, with the four main functions, and that broke down into like the Kiersey grammar stuff or the Myers-Briggs, however, whichever test people prefer, whichever set. Uh, so you name these functions, you name your feeling function, you name your thinking function, and you see them autonomously outside of you in the outer world, which is in a way outer space because it's outside of you. And everyone does this, whether consciously or not, by the power of projection, and they don't realize it. So you get into the same relationship all the time until you integrate whatever complexes and all that happen. But if you go into it consciously, then, which is what Jung was testing. Okay, so there's my thinking function, and I've named that Ilsa, right? And I'm going to put Ilsa onto this person in the outer world, say my wife, or my friend over here that isn't another scientist, right? Thinking function, this makes sense. And then your counter sexual self, which would be generally your partner. So, and it doesn't matter what, this has nothing to do with uh what's between your legs. This is
Yes.
this is your counter sexual part. So you're the mirroring inside of that which you are not. So if you are a more feminine person, it's your more masculine side, and it's projected out that way, etc., etc. With shadows, you pull these functions out of your psyche, you name them, and that way you don't have to play this game on other pieces out there, other people out there in the world. And then the phenomena becomes way more mystical and intense because people unconsciously play this out on other people's projections. And you can see where this gets very misconstrued and crazy.
Okay, so I think I'm going to put a bow on it that will lead us into our patron segment. And this is where you get the tuberculosis test, Lamb Elisa and Elisa Lamb, right? So what if literally this process, I mean, I've been exploring all different ways that this process was initiated, right? But what if literally like somebody in a few people turned up with what they thought was tuberculosis, and somebody ordered from some company somewhere a bunch of Lamb Elisa tests to be delivered to Los Angeles, and somehow that calling for Lamb Elisa, like Elisa Lamb heard it, Like there was an inversion
Yes.
there because of
Yes.
something that hadn't been sorted out in that sort of counter-sexual process that you're talking about. And so that ordering of Lam Elisa to Los Angeles brought Elisa Lam to Los Angeles into an inversion she didn't understand.
I love it. I love it.
All right, let's leave it there. We're going to go into the patron segment where we're going to kind of reflect a little bit on our conversation about Elisa Lam for last week. So before we leave the public segment, Nish, tell people all the places they can find you and how they can support you and what you're doing and what all that stuff.
Niish/Patreon is how you can support what I'm doing and the threads I'm working on. And I've housed my podcast, The Cosmic Salon, is everywhere podcasts are played. You just type in The Cosmic Salon. It is housed on anchor.fm. And from that portal, you can click on all those different places. So if you like it on Spotify, you can click from there.
Awesome. And you can still be found on Nox Mente and the Obelisk with Jerry,
Yes,
correct?
every Wednesday live. Yeah, noxmente.com. And also it's if you just type in at YouTube Nox Mente, NOX space MENTE, and that'll get you to our YouTube page.
All right, awesome. And if you guys would like to hear part 2 of this conversation, you can go to patreon.com/offplanetmedia or emilycmoyer.locals.com, and it will be available in both places for supporters. All right, guys, we'll see you on the other side.